Close your eyes, but keep your ears open. Imagine you're in that boat on the River Thames, that summer sun, the sound of the waves, and a man's calm yet somewhat suppressed voice, Charles Dodgson. In front of him, 10-year-old Alice Liddell is begging for a story with lots of nonsense. And then that man, an Oxford University mathematician who lived in a world of logic and order, began to tell a story that would become the most tangled, terrifying, and bizarre creation in history. You think you know this story, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, a little girl's forgotten dream, but let me tell you, you know nothing. This story is a trap for your sleep. Behind its curtains, the darkest, most horrifying secrets of Victorian England are hidden. This is the truth that will forever change this sweet little book from your childhood. So, let's take the first step into this secret. Picture the scene in that Oxford study after Charles Dodgson's death, when his own family cut out pages from his private diaries and committed them to the flames. Why? Was it a truth so dangerous it had to be hidden from the world's eyes? Those missing pages, that fire, it says everything. Without it, the truth of Alice is incomplete. When Charles Dodgson first wrote this story, it was just a private gift for Alice Liddell. But when he decided to present it to the world, something else happened. He added sections that weren't there before, sections that were completely unfit for a children's story, like the Duchess's baby, whose eyes grow unusually small and whose nose turns into a snout, like it's becoming a pig. Why? Was this just nonsense? No. On the streets of Victorian England, similar deformities were described. Medical reports mentioned children who looked like little old men. These were the children their mothers had ruined by feeding them laudanum, that yellow liquid opium, just to keep them from crying, to keep them silent. And Alice, she was in a similar world where everyone was drinking something, eating something, and changing. This was a horrifyingly common habit in Victorian homes. Opium was present on every kitchen shelf, just like tea is today. But Lewis Carroll didn't stop there. He gave birth to another character, one that still makes us all laugh today, the Mad Hatter. And he is the biggest secret of them all.
The Mad Hatter is one of the most beloved characters in all of literature. With his oversized hat, riddles with no answers, and his eternal frantic tea party, he is the very picture of delightful nonsense. But his madness was not a product of Carroll's imagination. It was a documentary detail ripped from the bloody headlines of the Industrial Revolution. The phrase "mad as a hatter" was not just a quirky saying. It described a very real, very horrific occupational disease. In the hat-making factories of England, like the one in Stockport, workers spent their days in poorly ventilated rooms using mercury nitrate to turn rabbit fur into felt for the fine hats worn by gentlemen. Let's give one of those workers a name. Let's call him Thomas. Thomas has been working at the vats for 8 years. Each morning, his hands tremble as he carries the basins of mercury solution. By midday, the shaking worsens so much he can't hold his lunch. His wife assumes he's been drinking. His children are frightened when his mood swings from laughter to rage without warning. After 2 more years, his speech becomes slurred. He starts seeing things, giant rabbits in the corner of the workshop. His co-workers, suffering their own symptoms, mock him. Mad as a hatter, they sneer. They don't know his nervous system is being systematically destroyed by mercury poisoning. Eventually, Thomas collapses. The factory replaces him within a week. His widow receives nothing. This was mercury poisoning. The workers inhaled the toxic vapors day after day. The metal attacked their nervous systems, causing the hatter shakes, uncontrollable tremors that made it impossible to hold a teacup steady, just like the hatter who rattles his cup and saucer. It attacked their minds, causing hallucinations, extreme emotional instability, and slurred speech that made them seem insane. The medical community knew. The factory owners knew. The government knew. It was an open secret. Yet the use of mercury in hat making wasn't banned in England until 1941, and only then because the military needed the mercury for detonators in World War II. So when you see the Mad Hatter trembling, spouting nonsense, and trapped in a pointless, repetitive ritual, you are not looking at whimsy. You are looking at Lewis Carroll's brilliant, damning portrait of a society that calmly accepted the slow poisoning of its working class for the sake of fashion and profit. The Hatter's madness is a political statement, and Carroll's satire of power didn't stop at the factory gates. It reached all the way to the throne. The Queen of Hearts, with her constant, screeching decree of off with their heads, seems like a cartoonish tyrant, but Carroll was tapping into a deep, bloody vein of English history. Remember the scene where the card gardeners are frantically painting white roses red? To a Victorian reader, this was not a random act. It was a potent historical reference to the Wars of the Roses, the brutal civil war between the House of Lancaster, whose symbol was the red rose, and the House of York, symbolized by the white rose. This was one of the most violent periods in English history, where the throne changed hands through assassination and execution simply for wearing the wrong colored rose. It was a time of absolute, arbitrary authority, where a monarch's whim could mean a death sentence.
The gardeners painting the roses are not just following orders, they are desperately trying to display the correct political allegiance to avoid execution. Carroll's readers would have understood this instantly. Every time the Queen screams for someone's head, she is channeling the ghost of English monarchs who did exactly that. In an era when Victoria's reign was seen as the pinnacle of civilization and order, Carroll was suggesting that beneath the surface, all authority was as capricious, violent, and unjust as a playing card queen. This critique of a broken system culminates in the story's final act, the trial. The courtroom of the King and Queen of Hearts is a masterpiece of legal chaos. The rules are nonsense, the evidence is irrelevant, and the verdict is decided before the trial even begins. This was not fantasy. Victorian courtrooms were often just as arbitrary. A starving seamstress stealing a loaf of bread could be sentenced to hard labor, while a gentleman who assaulted a servant would be released with a small fine. Justice was a commodity, not a right. When Alice finally grows to her full size and shouts, "You're nothing but a pack of cards," she is doing more than breaking a spell. She is voicing the ultimate truth that Carroll embedded in his story. She is saying that the entire structure of power, the mad industry, the violent monarchy, the corrupt courts, is a fragile illusion. It only has power if you believe in it, if you play along. This is the true subversive genius of Alice in Wonderland. It is not a children's story. It is a revolutionary manifesto disguised as a fairy tale. It is a detailed map of Victorian England's darkest secrets: the pediatric opium abuse, the industrial poisoning, the brutal history and capricious authority, all hidden in plain sight, nestled among talking rabbits and smiling cats. Carroll performed the greatest magic trick of all. He hid the truth in a nursery, knowing that children would cherish the adventure, while adults, if they looked closely, might just see the reflection of their own mad world. Beyond the poisoned infants and the maddened craftsmen, Lewis Carroll saved his most subtle and perhaps most personal critique for the very institution that shaped Victorian childhood, the education system. To understand this, we must leave the factory and the courtroom and step into a different kind of prison, the Victorian schoolroom. Picture it, 1865, Oxford. A dozen girls in identical brown pinafores stand with rigid backs, their hands clasped behind them. The air smells of chalk dust and fear. They chant in perfect, soulless unison, "How doth the little busy bee improve each shining hour?" Not one of them understands what they are saying. They don't dare to ask. In this world, a question is an act of rebellion. Curiosity is a sin. The governess, a Miss Strickland, holds a thin wooden cane that has already struck 3 sets of knuckles this morning for impertinent wonderings. This is education, mindless, robotic repetition until the words are carved into memory like epitaphs on a tombstone. One girl, let's call her Margaret, will later recite these same verses at her wedding, at her children's christenings, on her deathbed, never once knowing what they mean only that she must remember them perfectly or face the consequences. This is the world Alice carries with her down the rabbit hole. She begins her journey as the ideal Victorian child, her mind a neatly organized cabinet of recited lessons, multiplication tables, geography facts, and moral poems memorized by rote. But Wonderland immediately attacks this foundation. Watch what happens when she tries to use her knowledge to ground herself. She attempts to verify her identity by reciting her lessons. Let me see, 4 times 5 is 12, and 4 times 6 is 13. Her geography becomes nonsense. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome. Every piece of standardized knowledge she has been force-fed crumbles into meaninglessness. And here lies Carol's brilliant, subversive joke. Charles Dodgson, the Oxford mathematician, made Alice's multiplication technically correct if you change the number base. 4 times 5 is 12 in base 18. 4 times 6 is 13 in base 21. This was a sophisticated mathematical jab aimed directly at his academic colleagues, who were exploring increasingly abstract and non-Euclidean mathematical theories that seemed to defy common sense. He was mocking the very abstraction of the education system from the inside.
Alice's ensuing psychological crisis is the entire point. Who in the world am I? That's the great puzzle. Her identity shatters not because of a monster, but because the system of rote memorization she was taught to define herself by has proven utterly useless. Carol was demonstrating that Victorian education, with its emphasis on blind obedience and recitation over critical thinking and understanding, was creating children with hollow cores. Their identities were a house of cards, and the first strong wind of reality, or absurdity, would blow it down. This systematic breakdown of logic and identity finds its ultimate expression in the story's climax, the trial. The trial of the Knave of Hearts is the culmination of all the horrors Carol has encoded. It is a courtroom that operates on pure, unadulterated chaos. The rules are fabricated on the spot. The evidence is a poem that makes no sense, and the verdict is decided by the Queen's bloodthirsty mood long before the first witness is called. This, Carol argues, is the end result of a society that prizes authority over truth and obedience over justice. This wasn't fantasy. It was barely even satire. In 1856, a real-life case shook London that could have been lifted straight from Wonderland. A seamstress named Mary Barrett was brought before a magistrate for stealing a loaf of bread worth 3 pence. She had 3 starving children at home and hadn't eaten in 2 days. The evidence was clear. She had taken the bread. She was sentenced to 6 months of hard labor in Newgate Prison, where she would die of typhus within 3 weeks. That very same week, the Honorable Augustus Fitzhugh, the son of an earl, appeared before the same court for violently assaulting a housemaid so severely she couldn't work for a month. Multiple witnesses testified against him. He was fined £1 sterling, less than the cost of his morning champagne, and released with a warning to conduct himself as befits a gentleman. This was the Victorian justice system. When the King of Hearts nervously tells the Queen the evidence should be read and then the sentence, and she shrieks, "No, first the sentence and then the evidence," she is not being nonsensical. She is simply stating the quiet part out loud. And so, we arrive at the story's defining moment. Alice, having grown not just in size but in courage and clarity, finally stands up to this entire corrupt, arbitrary, and mad system. She looks the Queen, the King, and the entire court in the eye and declares, "You're nothing but a pack of cards." In that one magnificent line, Carol's entire revolutionary manifesto is unleashed. Alice is not just dismissing fictional characters, she is voicing the ultimate truth he saw in Victorian society. She is saying that the powerful, the industrialists poisoning their workers, the monarchy with its bloody history, the judges selling their verdicts, the educators stifling young minds, are fragile, paper-thin illusions. Their authority is a collective delusion. It only has power so long as we consent to play the game. to sit at the mad tea party, to follow the arbitrary rules. The family that burned Dodgson's diaries tried to hide a personal secret, but in doing so, they inadvertently highlighted the public political secret he had already hidden in the most brilliant way possible. He didn't write a children's story, he built a Trojan horse. He smuggled a scathing critique of his world into the one place it would be safest, most cherished, and most enduring, the nursery. The real Wonderland is not the hole Alice fell down, but the bizarre, hypocritical, and often cruel world of Victorian England itself. And the real magic is that for over a century, we have been reading a call to rebellion disguised as a fairy tale.
The final and most brilliant layer of Lewis Carroll's rebellion lies not in the smoky factories or opiate-laced nurseries, but in the pristine, orderly world he called home, the world of mathematics. For Charles Dodgson, the Oxford logician, the greatest absurdity of all was not the Queen of Hearts tyranny, but the crumbling intellectual foundations of his own time, and he attacked them using their own language, the language of numbers and logic. To understand this, we must revisit Alice's most desperate moment of crisis. As she tumbles through Wonderland, she clutches at the fragments of her education like a drowning woman clutching driftwood. She tries to recite her lessons, but the familiar rules betray her. She says, "Let me see. 4 times 5 is 12. 4 times 6 is 13. And 4 times 7 is... Oh dear, I shall never get to 20 at that rate." To any Victorian school child, this was sheer nonsense, a sign of her slipping sanity. But to Charles Dodgson, the mathematician, it was a perfectly logical, secret joke. 4 times 5 is 12 is correct if you are calculating in base 18. 4 times 6 is 13 in base 21. This was not a mistake. It was a deliberate, sophisticated jab. The Victorian era was a time of intellectual upheaval. New abstract forms of mathematics were emerging, non-Euclidean geometries that suggested space could be curved, symbolic algebras that operated outside traditional arithmetic. To a conservative logician like Dodgson, these new ideas seemed as absurd as a talking caterpillar. They were in essence declaring that 2 plus 2 no longer had to equal 4, that the very bedrock of reason was flexible. So, in Alice's confused recitation, Carroll was holding up a distorting mirror to his colleagues. He was saying, "You see, this is what your newfangled abstract mathematics sounds like to a child trying to make sense of the world. It sounds like madness." He used nonsense to satirize what he saw as the nonsense of modern thought. Alice's breakdown is therefore not just the failure of rote education, but the failure of a society's entire logical framework. If the rules of math can change on a whim, what can you possibly rely on? This theme reaches its zenith in the sequel, Through the Looking Glass. Here, the world operates on pure inverted logic. To get somewhere, you must walk away from it. You must believe in impossible things before breakfast. The White Queen offers Alice a job as a lady's maid for 2 pence a week and jam every other day. When Alice points out she never gets any jam because every other day isn't today, the Queen retorts, "The rule is jam tomorrow and jam yesterday, but never jam today." This is not just a funny line. It is a brutal parody of political promises and religious piety that always places fulfillment in a future that never arrives. It is the logic of the powerful used to placate the masses.
And what of the quiet, melancholic horrors Carroll added here? The character of the Mock Turtle, who weeps as he speaks of his childhood education in the sea, studying reeling and writhing, and the different branches of arithmetic, ambition, distraction, uglification, and derision. He is a creature steeped in a profound, unnameable grief for a lost world. This, too, was a reflection of a very real Victorian sadness. The Industrial Revolution was rapidly eroding traditional ways of life. The schooling of the Mock Turtle is an elegy for a world being replaced by cold, utilitarian facts. A world where beauty and wonder were being supplanted by uglification. All of these threads, a mathematical satire, the critique of empty promises, the mourning for a lost past, converge in the final chilling mechanism of control in Wonderland, the threat of annihilation. From the moment she arrives, Alice is aware that her adventure is a fragile thing. The king warns the White Rabbit that if he is nervous, he will have him executed on the spot. The queen's solution to every problem is decapitation. This constant, looming threat is the ultimate tool of arbitrary power. It is what keeps the card gardeners painting roses, the Mad Hatter at his endless tea party, and the witnesses lying at the trial. It is the fear that prevents questioning, that enforces conformity. Carol was holding a mirror to the unspoken contract of Victorian society. Conform or face social and professional annihilation. Question the status quo and you will be ostracized. Think outside the prescribed boundaries and you are mad. This brings us back to the beginning, to the enigma of the man himself and the diaries burned by his own family. The shadow they tried to erase has only grown larger with time, precisely because we cannot see it. We are left with the work, and the work tells us everything we need to know about the author's mind. It tells us he was a man who saw the madness in the world around him with terrifying clarity. He saw the poison in the medicine, the insanity in the industry, the tyranny in the classroom, and the absurdity in the logic. The legacy of Alice's adventures in Wonderland is not that it is a children's story that adults can also enjoy. Its true legacy is that it is a searing work of socio-political criticism that was cleverly disguised enough to be smuggled into the hands of children. It is a permanent record of the dark underbelly of the Victorian age, written in a code so playful and enduring that it has outlived the empire that spawned it. The final question is not what the real Alice meant to Charles Dodgson. The final question is what his story means to us. It asks us to look at our own world, our own Queen of Hearts, our own Mad Hatters, our own prescribed lessons, and to find the courage, like a little girl who has finally had enough, to stand up and declare, "You're nothing but a pack of cards." For in the end, Lewis Carroll's greatest gift was the belief that nonsense, when stared at with clear, unflinching eyes, can reveal the most profound truth of all, that the rules of the mad world are not yours to follow, but yours to break.
We have peeled back the layers of poison, madness, and tyranny. But the deepest, most unsettling secret of Wonderland is not in its characters, but in the very act of its creation. It is the story of how a man, trapped by the rigid rules of his own society, engineered the perfect escape for his most dangerous ideas by hiding them in a children's book, ensuring they would be read, cherished, and remembered long after the empire he criticized had turned to dust. The burning of Charles Dodgson's diaries was the final, desperate act to control his narrative. But in doing so, his family only proved the very point his book so brilliantly made, that Victorian society was obsessed with hiding its uncomfortable truths. They tried to erase a personal secret, but the larger, more damning public secrets were already immortalized in ink, disguised as the Mad Hatter's tremor and the Duchess's pig baby. Consider the sheer genius of Carroll's method. In an age of strict censorship and social condemnation, how does a man critique the rampant opioid abuse killing infants? He writes about a little girl who drinks from a bottle and dramatically changes size. How does he expose an industry knowingly poisoning its workers? He creates a beloved, funny character whose every symptom, the shakes, the mood swings, the slurred speech, is a direct map to a real-world industrial disease. How does he condemn a corrupt and arbitrary justice system? He stages a trial where the sentence comes before the verdict. This was not just satire, it was intellectual guerrilla warfare. He took the issues that newspapers buried on page 6 and made them the centerpiece of a story being read aloud in fashionable drawing rooms and cozy nurseries. The most subversive ideas were not distributed in secret pamphlets, but bound in bright covers and given as Christmas presents. The Queen of Hearts was a more effective critic of monarchy than any political radical, because her absurdity made her undeniable. And what of the man himself? The ultimate
ultimate irony is that Charles Dodgson, the rigid mathematician, the stickler for rules, became a hero of the very countercultures he would have likely despised. The surrealists saw in him a kindred spirit who shattered logical narrative. The psychedelic movement of the 1960s mistakenly adopted Alice as their patron saint, seeing her chemical adventures as an endorsement of their own. They missed the point entirely. Carroll wasn't celebrating drug use. He was holding up a mirror to a society already drowning in them. He was a conservative who, by documenting the world with such clear-eyed horror, accidentally became one of history's great revolutionaries.
We have peeled back the layers of poison, madness, and tyranny. But the deepest, most unsettling secret of Wonderland is not in its characters, but in the very act of its creation. It is the story of how a man, trapped by the rigid rules of his own society, engineered the perfect escape for his most dangerous ideas by hiding them in a children's book, ensuring they would be read, cherished, and remembered long after the empire he criticized had turned to dust. The burning of Charles Dodgson's diaries was the final, desperate act to control his narrative. But in doing so, his family only proved the very point his book so brilliantly made, that Victorian society was obsessed with hiding its uncomfortable truths. They tried to erase a personal secret, but the larger, more damning public secrets were already immortalized in ink, disguised as the Mad Hatter's tremor and the Duchess's pig baby. Consider the sheer genius of Carroll's method. In an age of strict censorship and social condemnation, how does a man critique the rampant opioid abuse killing infants? He writes about a little girl who drinks from a bottle and dramatically changes size. How does he expose an industry knowingly poisoning its workers? He creates a beloved, funny character whose every symptom, the shakes, the mood swings, the slurred speech, is a direct map to a real-world industrial disease. How does he condemn a corrupt and arbitrary justice system? He stages a trial where the sentence comes before the verdict. This was not just satire, it was intellectual guerrilla warfare. He took the issues that newspapers buried on page 6 and made them the centerpiece of a story being read aloud in fashionable drawing rooms and cozy nurseries. The most subversive ideas were not distributed in secret pamphlets, but bound in bright covers and given as Christmas presents. The Queen of Hearts was a more effective critic of monarchy than any political radical, because her absurdity made her undeniable. And what of the man himself? The ultimate irony is that Charles Dodgson, the rigid mathematician, the stickler for rules, became a hero of the very countercultures he would have likely despised. The surrealists saw in him a kindred spirit who shattered logical narrative. The psychedelic movement of the 1960s mistakenly adopted Alice as their patron saint, seeing her chemical adventures as an endorsement of their own. They missed the point entirely. Carroll wasn't celebrating drug use. He was holding up a mirror to a society already drowning in them. He was a conservative who, by documenting the world with such clear-eyed horror, accidentally became one of history's great revolutionaries. The story's enduring power lies in this masterful disguise. For children, it is a thrilling adventure of growing and shrinking, of talking animals and a mad tea party. The darkness feels like a fairy tale darkness, the kind that is thrilling but safe. For adults, it is a slow-releasing poison of realization. The older you get, the more you see the horror behind the whimsy. The baby turning into a pig becomes less funny and more tragic. The Hatter's tea party feels less whimsical and more like a portrait of eternal, helpless suffering. The Queen's screams become less cartoonish and more familiar in a world of capricious authority. This is Carroll's final and greatest trick. The book grows up with you. It reveals its true face only when you are ready to see it. The nonsense functions as a filter, ensuring that only those who look closely will find the key to the hidden message. So the next next time you see Alice, remember that she is more than a children's character. She is a vessel. She is the confused, logical mind navigating a world that has abandoned reason. She is the symbol of innocence confronting a system built on hidden poisons, industrial cruelty, and arbitrary power. And her final act, declaring the authorities to be nothing but a pack of cards, is the ultimate act of liberation that Carroll himself could only achieve through fiction. The missing diary pages have left a permanent shadow over the man, Charles Dodgson, but they have also cast the work, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, in a permanent, revealing light. It stands not as a quaint children's book, but as a timeless, coded warning. A warning that the most monstrous truths about a society are often hidden in its plainest sight, whispered not in secret meetings, but in the one place no one thinks to look, a story for a child.
Beyond the physical poisons and political tyrannies, Carroll embedded an even more insidious critique in Wonderland, an examination of the psychological prison that was Victorian society. While Alice confronts literal growing and shrinking, the true horror lies in how her mind is systematically broken down and reshaped by the absurd rules of this new world. Consider the psychological torture of perpetual uncertainty. From the moment Alice falls down the rabbit hole, nothing follows logical rules. The creatures she meets demand impossible answers to meaningless questions. The Mad Hatter's riddle, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" has no answer, because in Wonderland, meaning itself has been severed from reality. This wasn't just Carroll being whimsical, it was a brutal mirror of the Victorian psyche. Trapped between rigid religious dogma and emerging scientific theories that threaten to unravel all previously held truths. The most devastating psychological manipulation comes from the way Wonderland gaslights Alice at every turn. When she accurately recalls her world's logic, she's immediately told she's wrong, confused, or mad. The caterpillar demands she explain herself, while refusing to clarify what he means. The Cheshire Cat tells her they're all mad here, normalizing insanity. This systematic invalidation of her experiences and memories mirrors exactly how Victorian society treated women and children. Their thoughts were dismissed, their feelings minimized, their realities denied. Modern psychology would recognize what happens to Alice as a form of identity dissolution. Her constant questioning of who in the world am I isn't philosophical curiosity, it's the direct result of being in an environment where all reference points have been destroyed, where language has been weaponized against meaning, and where her very perception of reality is constantly challenged. The Victorian education system she represents had already programmed her for this collapse by valuing rote memorization over critical thinking. The psychological horror deepens when we examine Carroll's portrayal of time itself. The Mad Hatter's eternal tea party, frozen at 6 p.m., represents more than just mercury poisoning. It captures the Victorian terror of stagnation beneath the illusion of progress. While factories produce new wonders daily, society remained trapped in endless repetitions of class hierarchy, gender roles, and social rituals. The Hatter's watch, which tells the day but not the hour, symbolizes a society that could measure time but had lost all sense of its meaningful passage. Even Wonderland's geography serves as psychological warfare. Spaces expand and contract unpredictably. Doors lead to impossible spaces. Paths refuse to go where they should. This spatial uncertainty reflects the Victorian woman's constrained existence, trapped in parlors and drawing rooms, limited in movement, yet expected to navigate complex social labyrinths where a single misstep could mean ruin. The ultimate psychological violence occurs during the trial scene, where language is completely divorced from meaning. The king interprets evidence however he chooses. Words mean whatever he says they mean, and Alice's logical objections are dismissed as irrelevant. This wasn't just satire of courts, it was a depiction of how power manipulates language
to control reality itself. In a society where men defined everything from scientific truth to moral virtue, women like Alice were always at the mercy of others' interpretations. When Alice finally rebels, shouting, "You're nothing but a pack of cards," she isn't just breaking a spell, she's performing an act of psychological liberation. She rejects their absurd rules, their manipulated language, their distorted reality. In that moment, Carol gives us the blueprint for escaping not just Wonderland, but any psychological prison. See the manipulators for what they are. Reject their false realities and trust your own experience. This makes Alice in Wonderland not just a social critique, but one of literature's first explorations of psychological survival in a gaslighting society. Carroll wasn't just writing about external horrors, he was mapping the internal landscape of a mind learning to preserve itself against a world determined to drive it mad. The true wonder isn't that Alice survived Wonderland, but that she emerged with her sanity intact, having learned the most radical lesson of all, that sometimes the only way to stay sane is to recognize the madness around you for what it is.
Wonderland represents the hidden horrors of Victorian society, then Through the Looking Glass serves as Carol's ultimate prophecy, a chilling vision of where these social pathologies were leading. Published in 1871 at the height of British imperial power, this sequel reveals a world where absurdity has become institutionalized, where chaos is codified into law, and where the only way to survive is to accept that nothing makes sense. The most terrifying innovation of Looking Glass World is its complete inversion of cause and effect. Here, you must believe impossible things before breakfast. You mourn someone before they've been injured. The White Queen screams in pain before pricking her finger. This isn't just whimsy, it's Carol's brutal commentary on a political system that created consequences without causes, that sent men to die in foreign wars for reasons they couldn't comprehend, that built an empire on exploitation while preaching morality. Consider the Red Queen's famous principle. Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. This isn't just a funny quote about effort. It's the perfect description of industrial capitalism. Workers running faster in factories for stagnant wages. The middle class maintaining appearances while sliding into debt. The empire expanding while its foundations crumbled. Everyone running, nobody progressing. The chessboard world Alice enters functions as a damning metaphor for Victorian social mobility. Alice begins as a white pawn with the promise of becoming queen, but only by moving through predetermined squares, following arbitrary rules, and surviving encounters with powerful pieces that can remove her at any moment. This was the Victorian dream, advancement possible in theory, but constrained by invisible barriers and subject to the whims of those already in power. Even the nursery rhymes come twisted in Looking Glass World. The Walrus and the Carpenter isn't just a poem, it's a lesson in imperial economics. The walrus, Britain, weeps sentimental tears while systematically consuming the oysters, the colonized peoples. The carpenter, industrialists, provides the tools and infrastructure for this consumption. Both pretend to offer friendship and opportunity while leading their victims to destruction. The poem ends with the walrus lamenting, "I weep for you, I deeply sympathize," even as he picks the last oyster from its shell, the perfect image of colonial hypocrisy.
But Carol's most brilliant manipulation lies in the character of Humpty Dumpty. This egg isn't just a nursery rhyme character, he's the embodiment of linguistic tyranny. When he declares, "When I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less," he's not being charmingly eccentric. He's demonstrating how those in power control reality by controlling language. In Humpty's world, words don't have fixed meanings, they have assigned purposes. Truth becomes whatever serves the speaker's interest. This was Carol's warning about the future of politics. He saw a world where leaders would redefine words to suit their purposes, where freedom meant oppression, where progress meant destruction, where civilization meant
brutality. Humpty's fall becomes not just a physical accident, but the inevitable collapse of any system where language loses its connection to shared reality. The most haunting aspect of Looking Glass World is its pervasive sense of predestination. As a chess game, every move is predetermined. The flowers tell Alice she's just part of the Red Queen's dream. Even time moves backward in some parts of the landscape. This fatalism reflects the Victorian crisis of fate, the terrifying possibility that free will might be an illusion, that humanity might be mere pawns in a game whose rules they can't comprehend. When Alice finally becomes queen and the entire world turns into soup and chaos, we see Carol's final vision, a society so consumed by its own contradictions that it literally dissolves into nonsense. The Red Queens and White Queens argue over meaningless protocol, while the foundation crumbles beneath them. The feast becomes inedible, the speeches become incomprehensible, and the rulers become indistinguishable from the ruled in their shared madness. This is why Through the Looking Glass remains Carol's most sophisticated work. While Wonderland showed us the hidden horrors of Victorian England, Looking Glass shows us the psychological and philosophical consequences of living in such a world. It's not enough to survive the madness. One must learn to see through the looking glass itself, to understand that the reflection isn't reality, but a distorted version created by those who benefit from the distortion. Carol's ultimate message is that in a world where nothing is as it seems, the greatest act of rebellion is to insist on seeing clearly. When Alice wakes by asking, "Which dream was it?" she's asking the essential question we all must confront. In a society built on illusions, how do we distinguish the real from the reflection? The looking glass doesn't just show us an alternate world, it shows us our own world, reflected back in all its absurd glory. The most tragic fate that befell Carol's masterpiece was not censorship or condemnation, but the very thing that ensured its survival, its adoption as a children's classic. Over the decades, the sharp edges of his satire were smoothed down, the dark truths were sanitized, and the revolutionary manifesto was transformed into a harmless fairy tale. The cultural bomb was diffused by being placed on the nursery shelf, its dangerous contents forgotten, while its colorful packaging was celebrated. The process of this neutering began almost immediately. By the late Victorian era, Alice had already become a symbol of childhood innocence. Illustrators like John Tenniel, while brilliant, inevitably softened the horror. The Duchess's truly grotesque baby became a vaguely pig-like creature, more comical than terrifying. The Mad Hatter's palsy became a charming quirk rather than a depiction of neurological decay. The opium references were completely overlooked, transformed into mere fantasy. Society performed the ultimate act of deflection. It embraced the story by refusing to see what it was actually about. The 20th century completed this transformation. Disney's 1951 animated version crystallized Alice as a sweet, dreamy adventure. All the political and social commentary was stripped away, leaving only the basic plot of a girl encountering strange characters. The baby pig transformation became a brief humorous moment. The Hatter became a purely comic figure. The Queen of Hearts became a standard-issue cartoon villain. The poison, the politics, the psychological horror all disappeared beneath the gloss of animation and musical numbers. Even the 1960s counterculture, which claimed to find deeper meaning in Alice, largely missed the point. They saw a psychedelic drug trip where Carol had depicted social poison. They celebrated the madness while ignoring what made the Hatter truly mad. They embraced the absurdity without understanding it as a critique of their own society's absurdities. In trying to reclaim Alice as counterculture, they actually continued the process of depoliticization. They made her about individual consciousness rather than social criticism. Academic analysis, while recognizing the darker themes, committed its own form of neutering. By locking Carol's critique in the ivory tower of literary theory, scholars transformed a revolutionary text into an object of intellectual study. The burning social issues Carol addressed became themes. His angry satire became narrative techniques, and his dangerous truths became subtext. The bomb was safely contained in the display case of academic discourse.
But perhaps the most effective mechanism for forgetting has been our own comfort. We've preferred the safe, familiar
Alice, the one on lunchboxes and children's bedding, to the disturbing, challenging one. It's easier to see her as a curious girl in a pretty blue dress than as the vehicle for exposing infant opioid death and industrial poisoning. We've collectively chosen the dream over the nightmare, even though Carol made it clear they were the same thing. This sanitization represents the ultimate victory of the forces Carol criticized. The factory owners who didn't want to see the mercury poisoning, the mothers who didn't want to acknowledge the laudanum deaths, the politicians who didn't want to confront systemic injustice. They all won when Alice became just a children's story. The most effective way to silence a critic isn't to ban their work, but to embrace it so completely that you erase its meaning. Yet traces of the truth remain, like ghostly fingerprints on the nursery wall. Children still feel the unease beneath the whimsy. They understand that something is wrong in Wonderland, even if they can't articulate what. The story continues to haunt us because its darkness is structural, not superficial. You can remove the political context, but you can't remove the fundamental wrongness of a world where babies turn into pigs and hatters tremble uncontrollably. This brings us to our current moment, where we face our own versions of Victorian England's denials. We have our own hidden poisons in our food and environment, our own industrial diseases we prefer not to see, our own arbitrary authorities we hesitate to challenge. Perhaps the reason Alice endures is because we need her to. Not the sanitized version, but the true, dark, dangerous Alice. The one who teaches us that sometimes the most important question isn't how do I get home, but why is this world so mad? The final irony is this: Carol's masterpiece had to be disguised as a children's story to survive. But for it to truly live, we must finally see it as the adult story it always was. We must read it not with the innocent eyes of a child, but with the clear, unflinching gaze of someone willing to see the terrible truths hidden in plain sight. The Looking Glass doesn't just show us Wonderland, it shows us ourselves and the questions we've been too comfortable to ask. The story's journey from social critique to nursery staple and back again mirrors Alice's own journey. We fell down the rabbit hole of simplification, navigated the maze of commercialization, and now stand at the threshold of rediscovery. The real wonder isn't that Alice survived her adventures, but that Carol's dangerous truth survived a century of being treated as safe children's entertainment. The ultimate nonsense would be if we never bothered to look past the talking animals to see the screaming reality beneath. We have excavated the Victorian corpse buried beneath Wonderland's garden. We have smelled the opium on its breath and seen the mercury tremors in its hands. But the most pressing question remains: why does this 150-year-old children's book, with its dated references and forgotten contexts, still grip our modern imagination with such uncanny force? The answer is both simple and terrifying, because we never left Wonderland. We simply redecorated it. Look at our modern Mad Hatters. They no longer work in felt factories, but in Silicon Valleys and gig economies. The mercury poisoning has been replaced by algorithm-induced anxiety. The perpetual tremor now manifests in the endless scroll through social media feeds. The madness in the relentless pressure to be constantly productive and perpetually available. Our tea parties are eternal Zoom meetings where nobody can agree on anything, and we're all running just to stay in place. Exactly as the Red Queen described. Consider the Duchess's baby in our time. We may not quiet infants with laudanum anymore, but we pacify them with screens. We feed them processed food full of chemicals whose long-term effects we don't fully understand. We've replaced one form of quiet poisoning with another, more sophisticated kind. The babies don't turn into pigs anymore. They develop attention disorders and allergies, and we can't quite explain why. The Queen of Hearts' cry of "off with their heads" has found new life in cancel culture and online mob justice. Trials are still conducted based on mood rather than evidence, only now the courtroom is digital and the execution is social and professional annihilation. The card gardeners painting roses red have their modern equivalents in PR firms spinning narratives, politicians rebranding failures, and all of us care carefully curating our online personas to show the right color to the world. Carol's critique of education feels more relevant than ever. We still teach children to memorize rather than understand, to pass tests rather than to think critically. Alice's crisis of identity, who in the head am I, echoes in a generation constructing their identities from social media templates and influencer ideals. We're all falling down rabbit holes of misinformation, drinking from bottles labeled "Drink Me" that promise to shrink complex issues into simple slogans, eating cakes that make us grow with rage but not wisdom.
Carol's mathematical satire finds its counterpart today. In an era of alternative facts and reality distortion, where truth becomes subjective and numbers can be made to say anything, we're living in Humpty Dumpty's world where words mean whatever those in power choose them to mean. War is peace, Orwell warned, but Carol saw it coming first, a world where nonsense wears the crown of logic. The most haunting parallel lies in our relationship with substances. The Victorians consumed opium unaware of its full danger. We consume prescription antidepressants, energy drinks, and recreational drugs while barely understanding their long-term impacts on our brains and society. We're still drinking potions to change how we feel, to make ourselves smaller or larger to fit different social situations, still seeking chemical solutions to existential problems. So why does Alice still matter? Not as a historical curiosity, but as a field guide. She teaches us how to navigate a world that has lost its mind. Her journey provides the blueprint for maintaining sanity when surrounded by institutional madness. When she finally declares, "You're nothing but a pack of cards," she gives us the ultimate tool for liberation, the courage to name the absurdity, to reject false realities, and to trust our own perception when the world insists we're wrong. Carol's genius was in creating a story that would evolve with time, whose specific criticisms would transform into universal ones. He didn't just write about Victorian England, he wrote about the human condition in systems of power. He understood that the specific poisons might change, but the patterns of denial, oppression, and madness repeat endlessly. The final lesson Alice offers our modern world is this: the way out isn't to wake up from the dream, but to recognize the dream for what it is, to understand that the rules aren't sacred, the authorities aren't infallible, and the reality presented to us is often a carefully constructed illusion. The most radical act remains what it was in 1865: to see clearly, to speak truthfully, and to remember that even the most powerful queen is just a playing card if you have the courage to say so. We are all Alice now, tumbling through digital wonderlands and psychological looking glasses. Carol gave us not just a map of his century's madness, but a compass for navigating our own. The question is whether we'll have Alice's courage to use it. For 10 chapters, we've journeyed together through Wonderland's darkest corridors. We've exposed the opium in the nursery, the mercury in the factory, the tyranny in the courtroom. But now we arrive at the most important question of all. What do you do with this truth? The story of Alice is no longer just about Victorian England. It's about us. It's about the systems we accept, the injustices we ignore, the poisons we consume today. When Carol wrote "We're all mad here," he wasn't just describing Wonderland. He was diagnosing humanity's eternal capacity for collective delusion. Look around at our modern wonderlands, the social media platforms that breed anxiety while promising connection, the environmental poisons we pretend don't exist, the political systems that grow more absurd by the day, the mental health crises we medicate but rarely understand. We are all Alice now, tumbling through digital rabbit holes and psychological looking glasses. The difference is we have Carol's map. We know how to recognize the madness. But here's the secret Carol knew. Awareness is the first step to revolution. When Alice finally saw the cards for what they were, their power vanished. When we see our modern systems clearly, we take the first step toward changing them. This is why this story matters. This is why we've spent these 10 chapters digging through the archives and decoding the symbols, because the battle isn't just about understanding the past, it's about changing the future. If this journey through Wonderland's hidden truths has resonated with you, if you've seen reflections of our world in Carol's Victorian mirror, then your role in this story is just beginning. Subscribe to our channel, because the rabbit hole goes much deeper. We have more hidden histories to uncover, more cultural bombshells to detonate, more truths hidden in plain sight waiting to be revealed. Every subscription is a vote for more content that challenges conventional wisdom and exposes hidden histories. Hit the like button if you believe, like Carol did, that sometimes the most dangerous truths need to be hidden in stories to survive. Your likes tell the algorithm that intelligent, thought-provoking content matters, that viewers like you crave substance over superficiality. Turn on the notifications because you won't want to miss what's coming next. We're already preparing our next investigation into another classic that's not what it seems. The notification bell is your ticket down the next rabbit hole. Share this video with someone who needs to see beyond the looking glass. Share it with the curious, the skeptical, the truth seekers in your life. Help us build a community of people who know that sometimes the most important realities are hidden in the stories we thought we knew. Carol risked everything to hide these truths in a children's book. He trusted that future generations would be smart enough to find them, brave enough to face them, and determined enough to act on them. That generation is here. That generation is you. The Tea Party is over. The cards have been revealed. The choice is yours. Will you wake up from the dream? Will you see the madness? Will you join us in looking deeper? Subscribe now. Your wonderland awaits.